The morning had started the way most Saturdays do, quietly, unremarkably, with coffee going cold on the kitchen counter while I sorted through the week's mail. My phone rang twice before I noticed it, and when I saw Thomas's name on the screen, I let it go to voicemail. He was 29 years old. Whatever it was could wait 10 minutes. That was the first decision I would spend the rest of my life examining. The second call came 4 minutes later. Then a text. Then another. By the time I finally picked up the phone, something had already shifted in the air around me, the way pressure changes before a storm moves in. I recognized his voice immediately, but not the quality of it. Thomas was not a man who panicked. He was steady, methodical, the kind of person who read instruction manuals and kept his receipts. The voice on the other end of that call was none of those things. He told me to come to the hospital. He told me to come now. He told me not to ask questions until I got there. And when I pressed him, because I am his mother and pressing him is what I do, he said one sentence that severed my ability to think clearly for the rest of that day. "Mom, just don't take off Mason's onesie until you get here." I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't ask again. I grabbed my keys. The drive to Columbus General took 22 minutes. I have since made that drive dozens of times in memory, replaying every traffic light, every lane change, trying to locate the exact moment the world I understood became something different. I never find it. It wasn't during the drive. The world had already changed before I even answered the phone. I just didn't know it yet. Thomas was waiting near the entrance to the pediatric emergency wing. He was holding Mason, my 2-month-old grandson, bundled against his chest with the careful rigidity of someone who had been holding very still for a very long time. Ellie, his wife, stood slightly behind him with her arms crossed over her stomach, and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, the way people look when they are concentrating on not falling apart. Thomas handed me the diaper bag first. Then he handed me Mason. Then he looked directly at me and said, "I need you to take him inside. Tell them you're his grandmother. Tell them you're worried about the bruising." "What bruising?" He looked away. "Thomas, what bruising?" "On his ribs," he said quietly. "And his left arm." My throat closed. "How?" He didn't answer. He held the door open instead. And because I am a mother and mothers do what needs doing even when their hands are shaking, I walked through it. The triage nurse was efficient and kind. She asked me standard questions in a standard tone that changed the moment I lifted the edge of Mason's onesie at her request. Her expression shifted the way a person's face shifts when they see something they have been trained to take seriously. She called for a colleague, then a doctor. Within 15 minutes, Mason was in a room, and I was standing in a corridor answering questions I didn't have adequate answers to. That was when the social worker arrived. She looked ordinary enough. Mid-40s, dark blazer, sensible shoes, a notebook tucked beneath one arm. But her eyes told me she had walked into situations exactly like this hundreds of times before, and that very few of them had resolved the way the people in them had hoped. She sat beside me in 2 plastic chairs near the nursing station and told me her name was Carol. And then she said, very gently, "Mrs. Russell, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the phone call I had almost ignored, about Thomas meeting me outside and handing me the diaper bag, about his warning not to remove the onesie, about the bruises I had seen when the nurse lifted the fabric, small, dark marks distributed across Mason's rib cage in a pattern that didn't suggest a single fall or a single moment of clumsiness. I told her about the way Ellie had been standing, arms wrapped around herself, and about the quality of Thomas's silence, which was the silence of someone managing something enormous with great effort. Carol never interrupted. She wrote in her notebook in small, even script, and she listened the way people listen when every word matters. When I finished, she closed the notebook for a moment and looked up. "Has your son ever hurt a child before?" The question hit me like ice water thrown without warning. My answer came quickly and without hesitation, of course not. Thomas would never. But even as the words formed and left my mouth, something moved inside my chest that I didn't want to name. Because I was answering about the Thomas I had raised. The Thomas who had brought home stray animals and cried at the end of movies and called me every Sunday without fail for 15 years. And I realized, sitting in those plastic chairs under the fluorescent lights, that I couldn't say with absolute certainty that the Thomas standing outside this hospital right now was the same person. That thought terrified me more than anything else that had happened so far. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Mom, please answer." Then another one, sent 30 seconds later. A single word, "please." It was the please that undid me. Not anger, not demands, just desperation, naked and unguarded in a way Thomas almost never allowed himself to be. I didn't answer. I held the phone against my thigh and watched the radiology doors instead. When the doctor finally emerged, her face told me what her mouth hadn't yet formed into words. She was a small woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair. And she had the measured calm of someone who has learned to carry difficult news without letting it crush her. She pulled me away from the chairs toward a quieter stretch of hallway, and she spoke in a low, even voice. "Wu found additional injuries," she said. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. "What kind of injuries?" She paused for just a moment. The pause of someone choosing words with precision. "Several healing fractures," she said, "at different stages." I heard each word separately, the way you process language when your mind is trying to reject the meaning. Different stages, not one fracture, not one moment. Different stages meant different times. It meant a pattern, a timeline, a sequence of events that someone had known about and had not reported. The social worker had joined us by then. The doctor looked exhausted, and every terrible possibility I had been holding at arm's length came rushing forward at once. Had Thomas done this? Had Ellie? Had there been someone else? Some other caregiver whose name I didn't know? Some other presence in Mason's life that no one had mentioned? The answers felt close, like something I could reach if I just extended my hand far enough. But my hands were shaking too badly to reach for anything. Then the hospital security officer appeared at the end of the corridor. "Mrs. Russell, Wes, there are 2 people here asking for the baby." My stomach dropped before he finished the sentence. Thomas and Ellie came through the security door less than a minute later. Ellie was crying. Genuine, hiving, barely contained crying that she was struggling to keep quiet. Thomas looked like a man running from something that was gaining on him. The moment he saw me, he moved forward with his arms already half extended, and security stepped smoothly into the space between us. "Sir, stay back please. That's my son in there." Carol stood up from her chair. "So you're Mason's father?" "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Then we need to talk." What followed was several hours of simultaneous and overlapping conversations that I experienced in fragments. Documents were produced and signed. A detective arrived from the county department. The doctor explained Mason's condition to Thomas and Ellie using diagrams and careful language, while Carol sat across from them with her notebook open. I answered questions from 2 different people at the same time and somehow managed to produce coherent answers to both. But throughout all of it, something kept pulling at my attention like a thread caught on a nail. Whenever the doctors discussed the injuries, the fractures, the bruising, the pattern of damage, Ellie's face crumpled completely. She pressed her hand over her mouth and her shoulders shook. Thomas, sitting beside her, looked afraid. Genuinely, visibly afraid, but not surprised. Afraid and surprised are different expressions on a face. Afraid is open. Surprised widens the eyes and slackens the jaw and creates a moment of blankness before comprehension arrives. Thomas was afraid, but he wasn't blank. He was processing something he already partially understood, and that distinction settled into me like a stone dropping into still water. Hours passed. Near midnight, the hospital quieted into its after-hours rhythm. Vending machines hummed at the ends of corridors. Cleaning crews moved through with their carts in near silence. Mason had finally fallen asleep in a hospital crib, hooked to a monitoring device that beeped softly at regular intervals, and I sat beside him watching his chest rise and fall until the room around me faded into background. That was when the detective came back carrying a folder. He was a methodical man, patient in the way that people who spend years on difficult cases become patient. He sat across from me and opened the folder on the table between us and said, "Mrs. Russell, I need to show you something." Inside were photographs. Security camera images, printed on glossy paper with timestamps in the lower corners. Hallway footage from an apartment building, a parking garage. A series of images spanning what appeared to be several weeks, all centered on a figure. A woman, moving in and out of frame with the practiced unremarkability of someone who knows where the cameras are. He slid one image toward me. "Your grandson's apartment building," he said and pointed to the figure. "Do you recognize her?" I studied the photograph. A woman, perhaps late 60s, moving toward the building entrance with her head slightly angled away from the camera. I didn't recognize her. Not her face, not her posture, not anything about the way she moved. "Who is she? We were hoping you could tell us." I shook my head. But the detective didn't put the photograph away. He carried it across the room and placed it on the table in front of Thomas instead. The change was immediate and total. Thomas had been sitting forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of someone bracing for impact. When he saw the photograph, he went very still. Then all the color drained from his face in a visible wave, like a tide pulling back from a shoreline. The room went quiet. "Thomas," I said. His lips parted. Nothing came out. He stared at the photograph for another moment, and then he lifted his eyes and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not in 34 years of knowing him, not through any difficulty or argument or grief we had shared together. Then he whispered two words, "My biological mother." The silence that followed those words was the most complete silence I have ever experienced. It was the silence of a room full of people, who have all been struck simultaneously by the same thing, and have not yet recovered the capacity for speech. I heard my own heartbeat. "You're what?" Thomas lowered his eyes to the table, and in that moment, something I had always taken for granted, the simple, solid fact of my own life, the story I had always believed about who I was and how I had come to be, began to fracture along seams I hadn't known were there. "Mom," he said. His voice was breaking apart at the edges. "I need to tell you something." The detective sat down slowly. Carol stopped writing. Even the doctor, who had been reviewing documents at a standing desk near the window, went still. Thomas looked directly at me. For the first time since I had arrived at that hospital, he looked like a frightened little boy. Not a grown man of 29, not a father, a child, caught in something too large for him. "I found out 6 months ago," he said. "Found out what, Thomas?" "That I'm not your biological son." Silence. I heard nothing except the monitoring equipment and the distant sound of my own heartbeat, which seemed to be occurring somewhere outside my body. "No," I said. The word came out before I could stop it, before I could make any decision about whether to say it or not. It simply existed, the only word available. Thomas nodded, slowly, as though each movement cost him something. "My birth records were sealed," he said. "You were told I died after delivery." The floor seemed to disappear beneath me, because what he said was not impossible. What he said was something I recognized. 34 years ago, I had been in a hospital much like this one, in a room lit much like this room, and a doctor had come in and sat down and told me that my newborn son had not survived. A complication. The kind of language that medicalized the most devastating thing that had ever happened to me. I had lain in that bed for I don't know how long after he left, and I had made a kind of interior decision to survive it by burying it so completely that I could go forward. 6 months later, an adoption agency had called. There was a baby, a boy. He needed a home. Thomas, my son. My entire heart for 34 years. "No," I whispered again. The word was smaller this time. Tears ran down Thomas's face without any apparent effort on his part. He wasn't crying. The tears were simply happening to him. "The records were falsified," he said. "Someone switched babies." The detective nodded, slowly, with the grimness of someone confirming something they have been sitting with for a long time. "We've been investigating," he said. I stared at him. "For years," he continued. "Several infants were illegally transferred through a network operating out of a Columbus hospital in the early 1990s. Falsified death records, fabricated adoption paperwork, multiple families affected. My hands had begun shaking without my noticing. The room blurred at the edges. Because what he was describing was not a mistake. It was not a clerical error or a medical accident. It was a deliberate system, constructed by deliberate people, designed to take babies from their mothers, and reroute them to other families under a fiction of death and chance. And I had been one of the mothers. The detective pointed back to the photograph. The woman in these images is believed to be one of the surviving participants in that network, he said. She contacted us 8 months ago. Why? His answer was quiet. Because she was dying. Nobody moved. She confessed, he said. She admitted she had arranged the switch. She was one of the people who operated the network inside the hospital. I thought I might faint. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs and concentrated on the pressure of the chair beneath me and the feel of the floor under my feet. The woman in those photographs. The stranger moving through the parking garage footage with her head turned away from cameras. Had been inside my family's story for longer than I had known there was a story to be inside of. She had held the seam of it in her hands for decades. And then I thought of Mason. She was around Mason, I said. Thomas closed his eyes. Ellie made a sound that was not quite a word. A small, broken sound that she caught behind her hand. And then she began to cry in a way she hadn't cried before, with her whole body, leaning forward with her forehead almost touching the table. Not panic, not fear, grief, the specific, collapsing grief of someone who has been holding something terrible and has finally been allowed to put it down. Thomas thought she deserved forgiveness, she said, her voice barely audible. He thought she was trying to make amends. She seemed harmless. She said she just wanted to know him. Thomas looked shattered. She seemed harmless, he repeated, and the words sounded like something he had been saying to himself for months, a mantra that had recently stopped working. The detective opened another file. He laid out medical records, photographs, laboratory reports in a careful row across the table, and then he said something that changed the shape of everything we had been discussing. The bruises weren't caused by violence, he said. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. Less shock, more suspension, as though the entire room were holding its breath. Then what caused them? I asked. He described a genetic disorder. Rare, he said. Inherited through biological bloodlines in patterns that weren't always predictable. A condition that caused severe susceptibility to internal bleeding and bruising from pressure that would leave no mark on an unaffected person. Minor handling. A firm grip, the pressure of being held against a shoulder, the friction of ordinary clothing, could produce the kind of bruising that had sent us all to this hospital on a Saturday morning. The healing fractures, extremely fragile bones, a skeletal fragility that had nothing to do with force and everything to do with DNA. The kind of condition that explained a pattern without requiring a perpetrator. The doctor nodded from across the room. The scans confirmed it. She said, "We've already been in contact with a specialist." I looked at Mason through the glass of the room where he slept, small and utterly unaware, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of new life. Every terrible assumption I had made that night, every dark direction my mind had traveled, every look I had given Thomas that asked a question I hadn't let myself voice aloud. All of it shifted and reconfigured into something I hadn't anticipated. But the detective wasn't finished. The disorder wasn't the whole story, he said. My stomach tightened. He opened one final report and laid it on the table. The biological grandmother knew about the condition, he said. It exists throughout her family's medical history. She knew before she made contact with Thomas. She knew before she spent any time with Mason. The room went very cold. She deliberately withheld the diagnosis, he said. She never told Thomas or Ellie that their son might be at risk. She never suggested they have him tested. Ellie covered her mouth. Thomas stared at the table with the expression of someone watching their understanding of recent events rewrite itself in real time. Every memory of the past several months now relit from a different angle. Why? I asked. The word came out as barely more than breath. The detective's answer arrived carefully, as though he had been considering how to frame it. She believed that if Mason's condition became apparent, and if she were the one who helped manage it, appointments, treatments, support, it would give her a permanent and necessary place inside your family. She thought it would make her indispensable. The horror of it was indescribable. A woman who had participated in the illegal transfer of infants had spent decades living with what she'd done, and when she discovered she was dying, she had not simply confessed and walked away. She had found her biological son. She had inserted herself into his life under the guise of repentance, and she had withheld medical information about his child in order to engineer her own importance in a family she had helped destroy. I was still processing all of this, still attempting to locate solid ground inside a landscape that had been rearranging itself for hours, when the detective looked directly at me, reached into his folder, and withdrew one more document. He folded it lengthwise and held it out. Mrs. Russell. I took it. I unfolded it and read the first line. My vision blurred immediately, the way vision does when something causes tears before the mind has fully registered why. It was a DNA report. The name at the top was not Thomas's. It was mine. What is this? My voice was not quite steady. The detective looked at me with a particular kind of expression. The expression people wear in the moments before they say something that will permanently divide a person's life into before and after. A sad expression, and a kind one. After the confession, he said, we reopened several cold case files connected to the network, cross-referencing the biological families involved with the records we were able to recover. I stared at the document, at my name, at the line of data beneath it. I don't understand. He leaned forward slightly. The child you were told died 34 years ago, Mrs. Russell. The son you grieved and buried in your memory, he didn't die. The words arrived one at a time. He's alive. The room vanished. Not physically. The chairs were still there, the table, the fluorescent lights, the sound of monitoring equipment, but my ability to experience them as real and present temporarily ceased. I was somewhere else for a moment. Somewhere without walls or light or the sound of anything at all. Then the detective spoke again. The surgeon who was called in this evening to evaluate Mason's injuries. I heard the words from a very long distance. He smiled, that same sad, careful smile. Has your biological son? I don't know how long I sat without moving. Long enough for Thomas to reach across and put his hand over mine. Long enough for Ellie to lift her head from the table. Long enough for the detective to fold his hands and wait. Then I raised my eyes to the hallway. Across the corridor, outside the pediatric unit, a doctor stood reading something on a tablet. Tall, somewhere in his mid-40s. He was a man who had clearly spent his career in rooms like this one, and he held himself with the particular stillness of someone who has learned to be calm in the middle of emergencies. He had been in and out of our orbit all evening, answering questions, reviewing scans, consulting with the specialist, being contacted by phone. And I had registered him the way you register any competent professional doing their job, without looking closely enough to see anything beyond the function they served. I looked closely now. Kind eyes. A particular way of holding his mouth when he was concentrating. A line across his forehead when he frowned. Small things. Ordinary things. The kinds of features that become invisible in strangers and only become legible once you know what you're looking for. And then I saw it. Not any single thing, but the accumulation of all of them at once. Something in the angle of his jaw that I had inherited from my father and had watched appear on my own face in photographs for 6 decades. Something around the eyes that my mother had always called the family look, though none of us had ever been able to describe it precisely. The doctor looked up from his tablet. I think he had received the report moments before I opened mine. I think some version of what was happening on my face was happening on his. The careful, controlled stillness of someone attempting to hold themselves together while the ground beneath them fundamentally shifts. We looked at each other across that corridor. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The hallway existed between us like the space between two people who have been standing on opposite sides of a closed door, and are only now beginning to understand that the door has been there at all. His eyes filled. I felt mine do the same. 4 years, a death that wasn't a death. A grave I had visited. A grief I had carried so long it had become indistinguishable from the shape of my own life. A son I had mourned in all the empty spaces. Every birthday, every Christmas morning, every Mother's Day when I had allowed myself briefly to imagine who he might have become. He had become this, a doctor, a man who walked into emergencies and held himself steady, and helped frightened families understand what was happening to the people they loved. He took one step forward, then another. His throat moved as he swallowed. His hands, at his sides, were not entirely still, and then he said the word, quietly, carefully, as though testing the weight of it for the first time. Mom, at 64 years old, standing beneath the fluorescent lights of a pediatric emergency room, with Thomas's hands still covering mine and Mason sleeping 30 feet away in a hospital crib, I finally answered, "Yes, sweetheart." And it turned out that one word, sweetheart, the same word I had said to Thomas 1,000 times, a word I had said to my mother and my mother had said to hers, a word worn smooth by generations of use, was exactly large enough to hold 34 years of everything we had both missed. He crossed the hallway and I stood up, and he was taller than I had imagined, and his arms around me were the arms of a stranger, and not a stranger at all. And I held him the way you hold something you thought was gone forever, and have been given back without warning or preparation, without any of the time you would have needed to become ready for it. We stood there for a long time. Thomas was crying quietly at the table. Ellie had her hand pressed to her heart. The detective looked at the floor with the expression of someone who does a very difficult job and occasionally gets to witness something like this, and treasures it the way you treasure anything that arrives unexpectedly and reminds you of what the work is actually for. Mason slept through all of it. 2 months old, entirely unaware that his small, fragile body, with its inherited condition no one had thought to look for, and its bruises that had frightened everyone who saw them, had been the thread that, when pulled, had unraveled a deception 34 years in the making. My biological son and I eventually separated, and stood looking at each other in the way people look when they are trying to do years of learning in a single moment. There were things to explain, on both sides. Questions that would take months to answer fully. A history to piece together from records and memories and second-hand accounts. An entire relationship to build from the ground up, in the middle of our lives, with all the awkwardness and tenderness and grief that was going to require. But none of that needed to happen tonight. Tonight, Mason was safe and being cared for, and his condition had a name and a treatment and a path forward. Tonight, Thomas knew that the thing he had feared most had not been true. That he had not hurt his son, had never hurt his son, that the marks on Mason's body had come from deep inside his biology and not from anything Thomas had done or failed to do. Tonight, Ellie could breathe again, and I had a son I had buried 3 decades ago standing in front of me in a hospital hallway, alive, whole, looking at me with my father's eyes. The social worker Carol eventually gathered her notebook and her blazer and said goodnight with the quiet professionalism of someone who has seen every variety of human situation and has long since stopped being surprised by any of it. The detective shook hands all around and mentioned next steps that I could not quite hold in my mind yet. The doctor, my son, the word felt like something still learning to hold its shape, said he would come find me in the morning. And that we had time now. And that we didn't have to figure everything out tonight. He was right, we had time. For the first time in 34 years, there was time. I went back to the chair beside Mason's crib and sat there in the quiet of the late hospital night, listening to the small sound of his breathing. The monitoring equipment beeped its steady beat. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. The cleaning crew made one more pass. I thought about the phone call I had almost not answered. About sitting at my kitchen counter letting it ring. About the 10 minutes I had been willing to let pass before I got back to my son. I thought about how thin the margin was. How easily the whole thread could have stayed buried. How many times in a person's life the most important thing happens inside a moment that felt, at the time, like an inconvenience. Mason shifted in his sleep and made a small sound and settled back. I reached through the rails of the crib and rested my hand lightly, very lightly, against his side. He was going to be all right. They would manage his condition carefully. He would grow up knowing what his body needed, and how to protect himself, and he would be surrounded by people who loved him with the specific intensity of people who understand what it means to almost lose something. And somewhere down the hall, my son, my other son, the one I had been told was gone before I ever had the chance to know him, was finishing his shift notes and thinking about what came next for both of us. I didn't know his favorite food or what he was like when he was sick, or whether he laughed easily, or if he preferred quiet mornings to late nights. I didn't know what he had been told about where he came from, or what 34 years of living with that knowledge had looked like from the inside. I didn't know if there were other people in his life who would need to absorb what had just happened, or how long it would take before any of this felt real to either one of us. Mom. One syllable, a question and an answer at the same time. The most ordinary word in the language, made unrecognizable by the weight of everything it had been carrying across 3.5 decades without either of us knowing it existed. I had answered it. And that, for tonight, was enough. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.